In the biting cold of winter, a golden retriever lies helpless in a snowy alley, her frail body trembling against the icy wind. Her coat is patchy, her eyes dull, and her breath shallow. Pregnant and abandoned, she clings to the faintest hope that someone might notice her. As footsteps echo nearby, will this be her chance for survival, or just another passerby? The snow fell silently, blanketing the small town in a harsh, unrelenting chill. The biting wind howled through the narrow alleyways, carrying with it the loneliness of winter. In one such alley, almost hidden among piles of snow and shadows, lay a golden retriever, her frail body shivering against the cold. Her once golden coat, now matted and patchy, barely shielded her from the biting frost. Her ribs jutted sharply, and her swollen belly hinted at the life she carried, though she seemed too weak to protect it. Her breaths came in shallow, uneven puffs, forming faint clouds that dissolved into the icy air. Every now and then, her ears twitched faintly at distant sounds, but she lacked the strength to lift her head. Her eyes, dull and clouded, stared blankly ahead, as though the world had long abandoned her, just as her owner had. The only warmth she knew was the faint memory of a home she had once belonged to, now a distant echo in the cold expanse of her reality. Eloin's steps echoed on the frozen pavement, the crunch of snow beneath her boots, the only sound in the stillness. She pulled her coat tighter around her as the wind sliced through her, but the cold wasn't what weighed on her mind. Her heart was heavy, burdened by a loss she hadn't yet come to terms with. It had been 6 months since the car accident that claimed her husband's life. 6 months of waking up to an empty house, of bills piling up, and memories that felt more like wounds than comforts. She had tried to fill her days with work, pouring herself into teaching, but even that had become a struggle. Her students noticed the shadows under her eyes, the pauses in her sentences, but she waved off their concerns with forced smiles. At night, the silence of her home was deafening. Every corner reminded her of what she had lost. A photo on the mantel, a coat still hanging in the hallway. Tonight, as she walked home, the familiar ache in her chest felt heavier than usual. She had taken the long way, hoping the cold air might clear her head. Instead, it brought her to the alley. She almost missed it. The shape was so still, so lifeless, that it blended with the snow around it. But something made her stop. A flicker of movement, faint but unmistakable. Eloin squinted into the shadows, her breath visible in the icy air. She stepped closer, hesitant, her boots crunching softly. When she saw the dog, her heart sank. The poor creature was little more than skin and bones, its body curled tightly as though trying to shield itself from the cold. Its fur, once vibrant, was dull and dirty, clinging to a body ravaged by hunger and neglect. The sight of its protruding ribs and swollen belly made Eloin's throat tighten. It wasn't just starving, it was pregnant. Her first instinct was to call out, to check if it was alive, but as she took another step closer, she saw its eyes open slightly, meeting hers for a fleeting moment. They were the saddest eyes she had ever seen, filled with pain and resignation. Yet, deep within them, there was a faint glimmer, a tiny, fragile hope that someone might care. Eloin crouched down, her heart pounding. "Hey there," she whispered, her voice trembling. The dog didn't move, its body trembling visibly in the frigid air. Snowflakes settled on its patchy coat, melting against the heat of its shallow breaths. It looked so fragile, so broken, that Eloin feared even touching it might cause it harm. For a moment, she hesitated. She had enough struggles of her own, barely making ends meet, dealing with her grief and trying to rebuild a life that felt irreparably shattered. But looking at the dog, she saw something that mirrored her own pain. It was more than just an abandoned animal. It was a symbol of all the things left behind, all the lives deemed unworthy of saving. The dog's gaze flickered, and Elowyn knew she couldn't walk away. She couldn't leave it to freeze to death in the alley. Not this time. The wind howled louder, and Elowyn pulled off her scarf, draping it gently over the dog's trembling body. It flinched slightly at the contact, but didn't resist. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice soft and steady. "You're not alone." She reached for her phone, her fingers stiff from the cold. She had no idea what to do next, but she knew she couldn't abandon this creature. As she dialed the number for the local animal shelter, she glanced down at the dog, tears prickling her eyes. Chloe didn't have a name yet. To Elowyn, she wasn't just a dog. She was a fragile, desperate life clinging to existence, and Elowyn couldn't let her go. The icy wind bit at Elowyn's face as she carried the trembling dog toward her car. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the frail creature in her arms a sharp reminder of its fragility. The scarf she had draped over the dog barely provided any warmth, and Elowyn could feel its shallow breaths against her chest. Snowflakes clung to her hair and coat, but she paid them no mind. Her focus was singular. The dog needed help, and time was not on their side. She reached her car, carefully opening the door with one hand while cradling the dog with the other. Gently she placed it on the back seat, wrapping it in the emergency blanket she kept in the trunk. The dog let out a faint whimper but didn't resist, its body too weak to offer any protest. "Hang in there," Elowyn whispered, closing the door and hurrying to the driver's seat. The drive to the animal shelter was tense. Elowyn glanced frequently into the rearview mirror, checking on the dog. Its eyes were closed now, its body curled tightly under the blanket. For a moment, fear gripped her. What if it didn't survive the trip? She shook the thought from her mind. "You're going to make it," she said aloud, as much to herself as to the dog. "We'll get you somewhere safe." The shelter wasn't far, but the streets were slick with snow, and Elowyn drove cautiously. When she finally pulled into the small parking lot, relief washed over her. The building, a modest structure with a flickering porch light, stood out against the snowy backdrop. She hurried out of the car and retrieved the dog, cradling it close as she made her way to the door. Inside, the shelter was bustling despite the late hour. Volunteers moved quickly, tending to animals in need. The warm air hit Elowyn like a wave as she stepped inside, her cheeks stinging from the sudden change in temperature. A middle-aged woman at the reception desk looked up, her expression shifting to concern as she saw Elowyn carrying the dog. "Goodness, what happened?" the woman asked, hurrying around the desk. "I found her in an alley," Elowyn said, her voice tight with urgency. "She's starving, freezing, and she's pregnant." The woman's eyes widened. "We're at capacity," she admitted, glancing around the crowded room, "but we'll figure something out. Follow me." Elowyn trailed behind her into a small examination room. The walls were lined with shelves of medical supplies, and a steel table stood in the center under harsh fluorescent lighting. Elowyn gently laid the dog on the table, her hands lingering for a moment on its frail body. "Please," she whispered, "help her." While the staff prepared to assess the dog, Elowyn stepped into the waiting area. She sank into a chair, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. The warmth of the shelter was a stark contrast to the icy alley she had come from, but the worry in her chest hadn't eased. She glanced toward the door as it opened, letting in a blast of cold air. "Evening, Elowyn," a familiar voice said. She looked up to see Henry, her neighbor, brushing snow from his coat. His graying beard and sharp eyes gave him a thoughtful, weathered appearance. He had lived down the street from Elowyn for years, and though they weren't close, they often exchanged pleasantries. "Henry," she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" He held up a notebook. "I'm working on a piece about the shelter, how they're handling the influx of animals during the winter." His gaze shifted to the door Elowyn had just come from. "But what brings you here at this hour?" Elowyn hesitated, then explained. "I found a dog in terrible shape. She's pregnant, starving. I couldn't leave her there." Henry's expression softened as she spoke, and he jotted something down in his notebook. "Sounds like quite the story," he said, his tone thoughtful. Mind if I take a look? They returned to the examination room, where the vet was now checking the dog's vitals. The sight of the frail creature seemed to affect Henry as much as it had Elowyn. He stood silently for a moment, then flipped open his notebook and began writing. "What's her name?" he asked quietly. Elowyn shook her head. "She doesn't have one. Not yet." Henry nodded, his pen scratching across the page. "You said you found her in an alley?" "Yes, she was curled up in the snow, barely breathing." Elowyn's voice wavered. "I don't know how long she'd been there, but she looked like she'd given up." Henry looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Stories like this, about resilience, about people stepping in when no one else will, they matter," he said finally. "People need to hear them." Elowyn frowned. "I didn't do this for attention." "I know," Henry said gently, "but sharing this could bring awareness, maybe even help the shelter get more support. And who knows? It might encourage someone else to stop and help the next time they see an animal in need." Elowyn hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but she couldn't deny the logic in Henry's words. If this dog's story could help others, wasn't it worth telling? As the vet finished his assessment, he approached Elowyn. "She's stable for now, but the next 24 hours are critical. We'll do everything we can." Elowyn nodded, relief mingling with anxiety. She turned to Henry. "If you think her story can make a difference, then tell it." Henry smiled, closing his notebook. "I'll write it, and I'll make sure people understand just how much she matters." As the shelter staff moved the dog to a recovery room, Elowyn watched through the small window in the door. The dog's chest rose and fell faintly, a fragile rhythm of life. She didn't know what the future held for the poor creature, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't turn her back now. The dog still didn't have a name. To Elowyn, she was more than just an animal. She was a symbol of resilience, of hope in the face of despair. And as Elowyn left the shelter that night, her mind was already racing with possibilities for what the dog's name could be. The following morning, Elowyn returned to the shelter, her steps tentative as she entered the building. The air inside was warm and carried the faint scent of hay and cleaning supplies, a stark contrast to the bitter cold she had left outside. She approached the desk, her voice soft. "I'm here to check on the dog I brought in last night." The receptionist offered a kind smile and motioned her toward the recovery area. "She's stable for now. The vet said it's a waiting game, but she's showing signs of strength." Elowyn's chest loosened with relief as she made her way to the small room where the golden retriever lay. The dog was curled up on a padded blanket, her body still frail but visibly warmer and cleaner. An IV line fed fluids into her leg, and her breathing, though shallow, was steady. As Elowyn knelt beside the dog, her fingers brushed against the soft blanket covering her. "You're safe now," she whispered. For the first time, the dog's eyes opened slightly, meeting Elowyn's gaze. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough to bring a smile to her face. "I can't keep calling you the dog, can I?" Elowyn murmured. She thought for a moment, her eyes softening as she watched the creature before her. "Chloe, that's who you are, strong, resilient, and worth fighting for." The name felt right, as though it had always belonged to her. Elowyn sat back, her hand resting gently on Chloe's side. "Chloe," she said again, her voice firmer, "we're going to get through this together." Over the next few days, Elowyn visited Chloe every morning and evening, bringing warm blankets and sitting by her side for hours. She would stroke Chloe's fur gently, avoiding the raw patches where it had fallen out. She spoke to her about everything, the little moments in her day, the students she taught, even her favorite books. "I know it's silly," Elowyn said one evening, her hand lightly brushing Chloe's side, "but talking to you makes me feel less alone." Chloe's ears twitched slightly, and Elowyn smiled. It wasn't much, but it was a sign that she was listening, even in her weakened state. One evening, as Elowyn sat by Chloe, Henry appeared in the doorway. "Mind some company?" he asked. Elowyn looked up, surprised but grateful. Not at all. Henry pulled up a chair beside her, his notebook tucked under his arm. He glanced at Chloe, who was resting her head on the blanket. She looks better, he said. She's strong, Elowyn replied. I think she'll make it. There was a pause before Henry spoke again. You've been here every day. I can see how much you care about her. Elowyn hesitated, then nodded. I feel like I owe it to her. She's been through so much. Henry tilted his head, studying her. And you? What have you been through, Elowyn? The question caught her off guard. She took a deep breath, her gaze dropping to Chloe. It's been a rough year, she admitted. I lost my husband in a car accident 6 months ago. It was sudden. One moment he was here and the next. Her voice trailed off, thick with emotion. Henry waited patiently, his expression gentle. I wasn't prepared, Elowyn continued. He handled most of our finances. After he was gone, I realized how much debt we were in. The mortgage, loans, it's been overwhelming. I've been doing everything I can to keep up, but it feels like I'm drowning. She looked at Henry, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I didn't think I had anything left to give. But then I found Chloe and I don't know. It feels like she needs me as much as I need her. Henry nodded, his gaze thoughtful. You're stronger than you think, Elowyn, and you're doing something incredible, not just for her, but for yourself. As the days passed, Chloe began to show signs of improvement. Her appetite returned slowly, and she started lifting her head more often when Elowyn entered the room. The bond between them grew deeper with each passing day. Elowyn couldn't help but marvel at Chloe's resilience. You remind me to keep going, she whispered one evening, as she gently stroked Chloe's fur. No matter how hard it gets, we just have to take it one day at a time. By the end of the week, Chloe surprised everyone. When Elowyn entered the room, Chloe struggled to her feet, her movements shaky but determined. Elowyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You're incredible, she said, tears welling in her eyes. Look at you, Chloe. You're fighting so hard. Chloe wagged her tail faintly, the first sign of joy Elowyn had seen. It was a small moment, but it filled the room with hope. Henry visited again that evening, and Elowyn shared the good news. She stood up today, she said, her voice tinged with pride. That's amazing, Henry replied, jotting down notes. She's going to make it, Elowyn, and so are you. Elowyn smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in months, she felt like the weight on her shoulders was a little lighter. Chloe's strength was contagious, reminding her that even in the darkest moments, there was still a reason to hope. The quiet hum of the shelter was broken only by the occasional rustle of papers or distant barks from the other animals. Elowyn sat by Chloe's side, her hand resting gently on the dog's now noticeably larger belly. Over the past few weeks, Chloe had grown stronger, her coat glossier and her eyes brighter. Though still cautious, she had come to trust Elowyn completely, leaning into her touch and even wagging her tail faintly whenever Elowyn walked into the room. Not long now, Elowyn murmured, stroking Chloe's fur. The veterinarian had told her the puppies could arrive any day, and the anticipation brought equal parts excitement and worry. Chloe had come so far, but Elowyn couldn't help but fear complications. Henry stopped by that afternoon, a notepad tucked under his arm as always. How's our brave girl doing? He asked, crouching beside Chloe. She's ready, Elowyn said with a smile, though her voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. Henry jotted something down in his notebook. I've been working on the article, he said, but I want to wait until the puppies are born. Their arrival will make the story even more powerful. Elowyn chuckled softly. No pressure, Chloe, she said, glancing at the dog. That evening, as the shelter grew quieter, Chloe's time came. Elowyn was there, kneeling beside her, whispering words of encouragement as the first contractions began. The shelter's vet and staff moved efficiently, preparing for the delivery with calm professionalism. Chloe let out a soft whimper, her body trembling slightly as she began to push. Elowyn's heart raced, her hand resting lightly on Chloe's side. "You've got this," she murmured. "You're so strong." The first puppy arrived after what felt like an eternity. A tiny, cream-colored bundle, slick and wriggling. The vet carefully cleaned the pup and placed it near Chloe, who immediately began licking it with gentle, motherly care. Tears pricked Elowyn's eyes. "You're amazing, Chloe," she whispered. One by one, the puppies arrived, 5 in total, each as tiny and perfect as the first. The room filled with the soft sounds of their squeaks and Chloe's contented snuffles as she cleaned and nuzzled them. When the last puppy was safely delivered, the vet stood back and smiled. "She did beautifully," he said, addressing Elowyn. Elowyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She leaned closer to Chloe, her voice soft. "Look at them, Chloe. 5 little miracles." Chloe wagged her tail faintly, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and contentment. The sight of her with her puppies, curled protectively around them, was enough to melt even the hardest of hearts. The next morning, Henry arrived with his camera and notebook in hand. He had heard the news and was eager to see Chloe and her pups. As he stepped into the room, his usual composed demeanor gave way to awe. "Well, would you look at that?" he said softly, crouching to take in the sight of Chloe and her puppies. The tiny bundles were nestled against her belly, their soft squeaks filling the air. "5 of them," Elowyn said, her voice tinged with pride. Henry took a few photos, careful not to disturb the new family. "This," he said, glancing at Elowyn, "is the heart of the story." Over the next few days, Henry worked tirelessly to finish his article. He wrote about Chloe's incredible journey from abandonment to motherhood, weaving in Elowyn's struggles and the unbreakable bond that had formed between them. He described Chloe's resilience, her strength, and the miracle of her puppies, using every word to tug at the reader's heartstrings. When the article was published, it spread like wildfire. Titled, "The Dog Who Refused to Give Up, Chloe's Story of Hope and Survival," it painted a vivid picture of Chloe's hardships and triumphs, as well as Elowyn's compassion and determination. Within hours, the shelter began receiving calls. People from all over the community and even beyond wanted to help. Donations poured in, money, supplies, and even offers to adopt Chloe's puppies when they were ready. Elowyn was overwhelmed by the response. Boxes of food and blankets arrived at the shelter, along with heartfelt letters from people who had been moved by Chloe's story. One letter read, "Thank you for reminding us of the power of second chances. Chloe's story has inspired me to volunteer at my local shelter." Henry grinned as he read the messages aloud to Elowyn. "I told you this story would make a difference," he said. Elowyn nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "I never imagined people would care this much," she admitted. It's overwhelming in the best way." Chloe, oblivious to the attention her story had garnered, lay contentedly with her puppies. They were growing stronger each day, their tiny bodies filling out as they nursed. Elowyn couldn't help but smile every time she saw them, their presence a constant reminder of resilience and hope. As the community's support grew, so did Elowyn's confidence. For the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't fighting her battles alone. Henry's article had not only helped Chloe, but also shone a light on the struggles Elowyn had quietly endured. People began reaching out to her personally, offering words of encouragement and even financial assistance to help with her debts. "You've done something extraordinary, Elowyn," Henry said one evening as they sat together at the shelter. "Not just for Chloe, but for yourself. You gave her a second chance, and now people are giving you one too." Elowyn smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. She looked over at Chloe and her puppies, who were now squirming and exploring their surroundings. "She saved me as much as I saved her," she said softly. Henry nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's the beauty of stories like this. They remind us that even in the hardest times, There's always a way forward. The sun rose over the small town, casting a golden glow on the blanket of snow that still clung to the streets. Inside the shelter, Chloe lay peacefully in her recovery room, her 5 puppies nestled against her side. Their soft squeaks and tiny movements brought a sense of warmth and life that filled the space. Elowen sat nearby, her gaze fixed on the small family. It had been weeks since Chloe's miraculous delivery, and though her own life was still full of challenges, she felt a newfound sense of hope. The community's response to Henry's article had been overwhelming, and for the first time in months, Elowen didn't feel so alone. It started with letters. Dozens of them arrived at the shelter, each one addressed to Elowen and Chloe. Some were simple notes of encouragement, while others included heartfelt stories of people who had been inspired by Chloe's journey. One letter read, "Your story reminded me of my late dog, Max. He saved me during a dark time in my life, just like Chloe seems to have saved you. Thank you for sharing her with the world." Elowen read each letter carefully, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I never thought so many people would care," she admitted to Henry during one of his visits. Henry grinned. "You'd be surprised how much good a story can do. People see Chloe's strength and your kindness, and it reminds them of the good that's still out there." Soon the letters turned into action. Donations began pouring in: money, dog food, blankets, toys, and even supplies for the shelter. Elowen watched in awe as boxes filled the lobby, each one a testament to the impact Chloe's story had made. One morning, the shelter staff called Elowen into the office. "You'll want to see this," the director said, handing her a check. Elowen's eyes widened as she read the amount. It was more than she had earned in months. This is for Chloe?" The director smiled. "It's for you too. People want to help. They know what you've been through, and they want to make sure you're okay." Elowen's throat tightened with emotion. She hadn't realized how much she needed help until it arrived. As Chloe's puppies grew, so did the community's involvement. Families reached out to the shelter, eager to adopt the little ones when they were ready. The shelter carefully screened each applicant, ensuring that the puppies would go to loving homes. Elowen felt a mix of joy and sadness as she watched the first puppy leave with its new family. A young couple, their faces alight with excitement, cradled the tiny bundle as they promised to give it the best life possible. "Are you okay?" Henry asked, noticing Elowen's quiet expression. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I'm happy for them. It's just, they've been such a big part of my life these past weeks. It's hard to say goodbye." Henry placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You gave them a chance, Elowen. That's what matters. And you've still got Chloe." By the time all 5 puppies had found homes, Chloe seemed to have a renewed energy. She no longer bore the weight of her difficult past. Her coat had regained its golden sheen, and her tail wagged more often now, especially when Elowen was near. One afternoon, as Elowen walked Chloe outside the shelter, she marveled at how far they had both come. The donations had allowed her to catch up on her bills, and the support she received from the community reminded her that she wasn't alone. "You know," Henry said, as he walked beside her, "this story isn't just about Chloe, it's about you too. The way you stepped in when no one else did, the way you fought for her, it's inspiring." Elowen laughed softly. "I don't feel inspiring. I just did what I thought was right." "And that's what makes it special," Henry replied. Chloe's fame brought more than just donations. The shelter began to see an increase in adoptions as people who had read her story decided to give other animals a second chance. Elowen found herself volunteering more often, helping match dogs and cats with their perfect families. One evening, as she sat by the fireplace at home, Chloe curled up at her feet. Elowen reflected on how much her life had changed. The weight of grief and financial struggles hadn't disappeared entirely, but they felt lighter now, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection. "You've brought so much to my life," she said softly, reaching down to stroke Chloe's fur. "I thought I was saving you, but you've saved me in so many ways." Chloe looked up at her, her warm brown eyes filled with trust and affection. It was a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared, a bond that had grown stronger with every challenge they had faced together. As winter began to thaw into spring, Eowyn and Chloe walked through the town that had become their home. People stopped to greet them, many recognizing Chloe from Henry's article. "You're a local celebrity," Eowyn teased, scratching behind Chloe's ears. But Chloe didn't care about fame. All she needed was the warmth of Eowyn's love and the safety of a home where she belonged. For Eowyn, the support from the community had been more than just financial. It was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest times, people could come together to make a difference. And as she looked at Chloe, trotting happily beside her, Eowyn knew that the journey they had started together was only the beginning. The sun filtered through the curtains of Eowyn's modest home, casting soft beams of light onto the wooden floor. The house, which had once felt empty and suffocating in its silence, now pulsed with warmth and life. Chloe lay sprawled on a plush dog bed by the fireplace, her golden coat gleaming in the morning light. Eowyn sipped her coffee at the kitchen table, her gaze drifting to the dog who had become her constant companion. It had been months since she found Chloe in the snow, and in that time, everything had changed. The overwhelming weight of debt and grief that had once consumed her had eased, replaced by a steady sense of hope. The support from the community had not only helped her financially, but also brought her closer to people who cared. The letters, the visits, and even the small gestures of kindness had rebuilt her belief in the goodness of others. Chloe, too, had transformed. No longer the frail, trembling creature Eowyn had carried out of that alley, she now exuded a quiet confidence. She greeted each day with wagging enthusiasm, trotting around the yard or lounging by the window to watch birds flit about. "Ready for a walk, Chloe?" Eowyn called, standing to retrieve the leash. Chloe's ears perked up, and she padded over with her tail wagging. Out in the fresh air, the two walked through the forested trails near Eowyn's home. The snow had melted, replaced by budding greenery and the scent of damp earth. Chloe sniffed eagerly at everything, her tail swishing as she explored. Henry visited often, notebook in hand, though now he came less for the story and more for the companionship. He had become a regular part of Eowyn and Chloe's lives, stopping by to chat or lend a hand with small repairs around the house. One sunny afternoon, Henry arrived with a bag of treats for Chloe and a box of pastries for Eowyn. "You're spoiling us," Eowyn teased as she opened the box, the aroma of freshly baked cinnamon rolls wafting out. "Just doing my part," Henry replied with a grin, crouching to pet Chloe. "Besides, I'm pretty sure Chloe deserves it." Chloe wagged her tail in agreement, nudging Henry's hand for more attention. The three of them spent the afternoon in the yard, Chloe chasing a ball while Henry and Eowyn sat on the porch, sipping tea. As the weeks turned into months, Eowyn found herself rediscovering old joys. She picked up her gardening tools for the first time in years, planting flowers in the small patch of soil outside her house. Chloe loved to sit nearby, her head resting on her paws as she watched Eowyn work. "You're quite the supervisor," Eowyn joked, tossing a stick for Chloe to chase. The garden flourished, a mix of bright tulips, daffodils, and lavender, adding colour and life to the yard. For Eowyn, it felt like a metaphor for her own healing, a slow but steady return to life after the barrenness of grief. Henry continued to write updates about Chloe, sharing her progress and the impact of her story on the community. Each new article brought more letters, more support, and more connections. People who had been moved by Chloe's resilience often reached out to share their own stories of loss and recovery. One letter in particular stood out to Eowyn. It was from a woman who had recently adopted a shelter dog after reading about Chloe. "I was hesitant at first," the letter read, "but your story gave me the courage to take a chance. Now I can't imagine my life without Bella. Thank you for sharing Chloe with us." Eowyn read the letter aloud to Henry one evening, her voice tinged with emotion. "You've inspired so many people, Eowyn," Henry said. "You should be proud." She shook her head with a soft smile. It's Chloe who inspires them. I'm just lucky to be part of her story. Chloe's fame didn't change her gentle nature. She remained a loyal and loving companion, always at Elowyn's side. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, built on mutual trust and gratitude. On one quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elowyn sat by the fireplace with Chloe curled at her feet. Henry had joined them for dinner and was now helping her sort through a pile of letters from well-wishers. "This one's from a family in Oregon," Henry said, holding up a card with a photo of a dog that resembled Chloe. "They adopted a rescue dog after reading your story." Elowyn smiled, her fingers brushing lightly over Chloe's fur. "It's amazing how far her story has reached," she said. Henry nodded. "That's the power of hope. It spreads further than we can imagine." As the seasons changed and the flowers in Elowyn's garden bloomed, so too did her outlook on life. The struggles hadn't vanished, but they no longer felt insurmountable. With Chloe by her side and Henry's unwavering support, Elowyn felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. One morning, as she watched Chloe play in the yard, Elowyn realized just how much had changed. The dog, who had once been a shadow in the snow, was now a vibrant part of her life, a constant source of joy and comfort. "You saved me as much as I saved you," Elowyn murmured, smiling as Chloe bounded toward her with a stick in her mouth. Chloe dropped the stick at Elowyn's feet, her tail wagging furiously. It was a simple gesture, but to Elowyn it spoke volumes. As she picked up the stick and threw it again, Elowyn felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt bright. Together, she and Chloe had found a way forward, a path paved with hope, resilience, and the quiet power of love. The first blooms of spring dotted the landscape, a gentle reminder that even after the harshest winters, life finds a way to begin anew. The snow had melted, revealing patches of green that grew brighter with each passing day. For Elowyn and Chloe, the changing season marked not just the arrival of warmth, but the start of a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope, healing, and the quiet joys of everyday life. Chloe now trotted confidently through the garden as Elowyn tended to her flowers. Her golden coat shimmered under the soft sunlight, her movements full of energy and purpose. The once frail and abandoned dog had transformed into a picture of vitality and happiness. "You've come so far," Elowyn said, watching Chloe sniff curiously at the tulips she had planted weeks ago. "And so have I." Inside the house, the fireplace crackled gently, casting a golden glow across the living room. Chloe often napped by its warmth, her head resting on her paws, a peaceful smile on her face. Elowyn found herself pausing often to simply watch Chloe, marveling at how far they had both come since that fateful winter night. Henry remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting often to share stories and laughter. On one such evening, he brought over a freshly baked loaf of bread and a scrapbook he had compiled. "I thought you might want to keep this," he said, handing the book to Elowyn. She opened it to find pages filled with photos, letters, and clippings of the articles he had written about Chloe. Each page was a testament to the journey they had shared and the impact Chloe's story had made on the world. Tears welled in Elowyn's eyes as she flipped through the pages. "Thank you, Henry," she said softly. "This means more than I can say." That night, as Chloe lay curled up by the fire, Elowyn sat beside her, the scrapbook resting on her lap. "We've been blessed in so many ways," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I can't imagine life without you." She closed her eyes and clasped her hands together, offering a quiet prayer. "Dear Lord, thank you for bringing Chloe into my life. Thank you for the strength you've given us to heal, and for the kindness of the people who've supported us along the way. Please bless everyone who has opened their hearts to our story, and may they find hope and love in their own lives. Amen." Chloe shifted slightly, her eyes opening to meet Elowyn's. In that moment, the unspoken bond between them was clear, a bond built on trust, love, and the knowledge that they had saved each other. As spring continued to unfold, Elowen and Chloe embraced their new life with open hearts. They spent their days exploring the trails near their home, planting flowers in the garden, and sharing quiet evenings by the fire. Elowen began volunteering regularly at the shelter, helping other animals find the same second chance that Chloe had been given. It became her way of giving back, a way to honor the journey she and Chloe had shared. One sunny afternoon, as Elowen and Chloe walked through the park, a little boy ran up to them. "Is this Chloe?" he asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Elowen smiled and nodded. "Yes, it is." "My mom told me about her," the boy said. "She's really special." "She is?" Elowen agreed, looking down at Chloe with pride. The boy reached out to pet Chloe, who wagged her tail happily. "Thank you for taking care of her," he said, before running back to his family. Elowen watched him go, her heart full. Chloe's story had touched so many lives, and it was a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple out in ways she'd never imagined. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Elowen sat on her porch with Chloe by her side. The warm breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, and the world felt at peace. "You're no longer the shadow in the snow," Elowen said, scratching behind Chloe's ears. "You're my family, and you always will be." Chloe leaned into her touch, her tail wagging softly. The story of Elowen and Chloe is a testament to the power of compassion, resilience, and second chances. Their journey reminds us that no matter how dark life may seem, love and kindness can light the way forward. If Chloe's story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Have you ever experienced a moment where love and kindness changed everything? We'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. And as always, may God bless you and your loved ones, and may you find inspiration in the beauty and grace of life. Together, let's continue to spread hope, love, and the belief that every life matters.